Before we go any further, I would like to just read the Alberta Land Acknowledgement. We acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional and ancestral territory of many peoples, presently subject to Treaties 6, 7, and 8. This is namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Kainai, the Piikani, the Siksika, also the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Nakota Sioux, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina nations, as well as the Métis people of Alberta. This includes all the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived and cared for these lands for generations. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on today. Thank you. So this afternoon, we have 5 different stories of winter. And we hope that you will enjoy your tea and listen along. So I am the first storyteller. We also have 3 other storytellers who, along with me, are members of Storytelling Alberta, as well as 1 additional storyteller who is here as a very special guest. Without further ado, I am the first storyteller, so I am going to start my story. My story is a family story, and it surrounds a Christmas tin. And I'm not sure if you have Christmas tins in your family, but in my family, special Christmas tins to hold our Christmas treats were very special. This tin is a very special tin. It's from old Edinburgh, and it held shortbread. I'm going to tell you my story in 3 sections, starting with 1952 and March. The package arrived as it always did, in plain brown paper, the address typed on a sticker, tied in blue string. She saved it, as she always did, for Christmas Eve. This package had a postmark from Edinburgh, Scotland. She had received other packages other years, from Paris, France, London, England, and even Barcelona, Spain. On Christmas Eve, she went to open the parcel, but first she moved to the corner of the room, pulled out his latest record, and placed it on her record player. The sound of his violin filled the room. Carefully, she undid the package, putting the twine into a small ball, carefully removing the brown paper. And inside this year, she found a tin of Edinburgh shortbread with a beautiful scene of old Edinburgh on the front. Other years, she had received chocolates from Paris, toffee from Spain, and buttery cookies from London. As she listened to his music and held the tin, she was at first disappointed that he hadn't included a note, but then he never did. She listened to the music and thought of the last time that she had actually seen him play. That had been at the church, when his music had filled the whole church at their service on Christmas Eve. Now he was famous. He traveled the world. He'd even played for the Queen. She'd read that in the paper. But he had never forgotten his promise Well, at least not so far. She knew that one day perhaps the packages would end, but for now, it was enough that he had remembered. Part 2, Daphne, 1963. Christmas was such a busy time for Daphne. Cooking, cleaning, getting the house ready for guests. And this year, she took on an additional task to pull out the old family candy recipes. And she made brown sugar fudge with walnuts, chocolate fudge, creamy toffee, peanut brittle. The girls were over the moon with excitement, but Daphne insisted that they wait until Christmas to try the treats. So she put them in her special Christmas tins and hid them in the basement. On Christmas Day, everyone raved about the candy. Dad and her sister Marge were particularly impressed with the chocolate fudge. After Christmas, slowly the candy disappeared. And as it did, Daphne washed the tins and put them away for the next year. And then one day in February, Heather came running up the stairs excited. Mom, look what I found. It was the old Edinburgh tin in which they had stored the chocolate fudge. Well, the three girls gathered around the table as Daphne opened the tin, only to find green slime. The girls were so upset. The fudge had gone moldy. As Daphne threw out the fudge and washed the tin, she took the time to actually look at the scene on it. Old Edinburgh, what a wonderful looking place. She remembered that Marge had given her the tin, but she wasn't sure where Marge had gotten it from. She would love to go to old Edinburgh, but with a mortgage and 3 young daughters, that was not likely. So instead, Daphne traveled the world through her books. 2017 to present day, my story. The day we visited Old Edinburgh on the cruise, I was very sick. I had a really bad cold. As we stood waiting for the bus to take us back to the ship, though, I started to look around me and I thought, something looks familiar. And then it came to me. I was standing in the old Edinburgh tin. So I said to my sister, Heather, guess where we are? Of course, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, well, Dorothy, we're in Edinburgh. I said, no. We're standing in the tin, the moldy chocolate fudge tin. And we both laughed. Well, for many years, my mother used the tin. And then as I became an adult, every year she would make me my special treats that I loved, be it shortbread or sometimes sour cream chocolate cookies with peppermint icing that I just loved. And she'd put them in the tin, and then every year I'd eat them and give her back the tin. Well, I knew my mom's baking days were coming to an end the year she said to me, no, you keep the tin, Dorothy. And so since my mother has passed, every year I continue to use the tin and make my own treats from the family recipes and put them in. Now, I would just love to have my grandpa, my Aunt Marge, and my mom and my sisters sitting around the table with me to enjoy one of those treats from the Edinburgh tin. But I don't. But I still have the memories the tin brings. The only thing is that troubles me is I don't know where the tin originated. I know that it was my Aunt Marge's, but I don't know where she got it. But there is a very strange thing that happens. Every year when I open the tin, I swear I can hear violin music. Thank you very much. Okay, our second storyteller today is Kathy Jessup. And Kathy is also a member of Storytelling Alberta Edmonton chapter. Kathy loves to tell stories. She shares them with lots of people of all ages. And she also leads workshops on storytelling, writing, and performance. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Dorothy. I enjoyed your story.
Thank you.
Well, every Christmas, I like to buy an ornament for my tree, a new ornament. And over the years, I've accumulated quite a few of them. And I often go to the community craft fairs, and I like to get the homemade ornaments. So a few years back at one of the booths, I came across a lady who had beaded ornaments, and there was one of a spider made of beads. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of an odd thing to choose to make a Christmas ornament of. But I was intrigued. And so I bought the ornament, but I never really wanted to put it on my tree. I'm not really fond of spiders, but I kept it. And I thought, you know, maybe someday in a story about spiders, I'll be able to use it in my storytelling. So fast forward now to the current day. And very recently, I came across a story that's actually a legend from Eastern Europe. It's told especially in Germany and Ukraine, and it puts together spiders and Christmas, the connection. And I was so happy to learn this story, and I'd like to tell it for you now. The legend of the Christmas spider. A long time ago in Germany, there was an old woman who lived in a small cottage at the edge of a forest. And the cottage was very, very small, but that was okay because the woman herself was quite tiny. And the local villagers, they had known her for years, but there was a bit of mystery around her. They didn't exactly know her proper name. Everybody just called her Tante, which is German for aunt. So Tante's cottage, where she lived, this tiny little cottage, you might think it was too small. It had just one room, one window, and one door. That was it. But it was big enough for Tante and her pets. She had a canary for singing, a cat for purring, and a dog who liked to lay by the fire. And next door to her cottage was her barn, which was a little bit bigger. It held a donkey for riding. It had a cow and a goat for milk and cheese. There was a rooster who liked to crow every morning to wake her up. And there was a hen that delivered her an egg every morning for her breakfast. Now, with all of these animals milling about, as you can imagine, Tante never worried too much about her house being spotless, except at Christmas time. Every December, she would look around her cottage and she would nod and she would say, "Time to clean for Christmas." And she'd roll up her sleeves and she'd get busy. She'd start by shaking out all of the blankets and rugs in her house, and then she'd sweep the floor. And because she was so tiny, she used a little stool that she would stand on with her broom to reach up into the roof and all those corners and rafters to get at the spiders and their webs, and she'd sweep them right out the door. And then she would wash her floors and her windows until eventually everything was spick and span. And then she would smile and nod and she would say, "Time now to fetch Christmas." Out she'd go to her barn. She'd take an axe off the wall and a special harness that had jingle bells on it. And she would put that harness on her donkey, and then she'd get her little stool and stand on it and get onto the donkey's back. And out the two of them would jingle their way to the forest to find a Christmas tree. And Tante was very particular. The tree couldn't be too tall or too wide and bushy because it would never fit in her cottage. But it also couldn't be scrawny or crooked. She didn't like that. She would know the right tree when she saw it. And sometimes if it was a windy or a breezy day, she might even see a tree that seemed to be curtsying or nodding to her in the breeze. And she would say, "That's the one that wants to come home with me." So she'd get her axe and she'd come up a few branches and make her cut. She always left some branches at ground level so that it would make it easier for the tree to grow again. And then she would get that tree onto her donkey and fasten it down, and Tante would lead that donkey all the way home. And somehow the tree always fit the house. The top of it might brush the ceiling, and the branches on one side would touch the door, and on the other side they'd touch the window, but the tree fit. And Tante would smile and nod and say, "Time now to make Christmas." She'd put on her apron and she'd get baking. She would make dozens and dozens of her delicious gingerbread cookies. Those would be for the village children. And then she made sugar cookies shaped like stars. And what she'd do is put those on the branches of her tree. And it would almost seem like the stars had kind of tumbled out of the heavens and landed on the boughs. Very pretty. And after she'd done that, she'd get some apples and she'd polish them up nice and shiny and place them in the boughs of her tree as well. It's a very pretty tree. And then Tanta would turn her attention to making gifts. She always saved a nice juicy bone for her dog and she'd tie a bow on it. And she'd have a sprig of catnip for her cat. And she'd get pine cones and stick bits of cheese in them for the mice. And she'd string nuts for the squirrels and make seed balls for the birds. And she'd have, for the larger animals like the cow and the goat and the donkey, well, she'd get together bundles of oats, make them into sheaves, and she'd wedge those into the boughs of her tree so that every animal would have a treat at Christmas time. Well, except for the spiders, because they had been swept away. And then Tanta would look around and she would smile and she'd say, now it's time to share Christmas. And the invitation would go out and the village children would come running. They look forward to this day every year. They love to crowd into Tanta's tiny little cottage and munch away on her gingerbread cookies and eat her apples. And they, of course, would tell her all kinds of things that had happened to them that year. And she would share stories with them. And it was a wonderful visit. But then it would be time for the children to go home because this was Christmas Eve. And that was the night that Christkindle would come. He would go from house to house. And if the children were sleeping, and if they'd been good that year, they might wake to find a gift in the toe of their shoe. Well, they didn't want to miss out on that, so they would hurry home. And when the children were gone, Tanta would then open her door to her animal friends, and in they would scurry for their treat. And the bigger animals, of course, they couldn't fit into the house, but they would come around to the window, and they would munch away on their oats and peer in, enjoying all of the fun. Everybody having treats, except for the spiders because they had been swept away. But what about Tanta? What did she want for Christmas? Well, you know, as long as she could remember, Tanta had heard stories about Christmas magic. It was said that Christmas Eve, anything could happen. There could be miracles, like maybe even animals could talk, that kind of thing. But Tanta was an old woman, and she had lived through many, many Christmases, and she had never seen anything that resembled Christmas magic. But she was determined that this Christmas she would stay awake and she would see. So she looked around at her lovely cozy cottage with its tree and its blazing fires and her beloved pets. She smiled and nodded and she said, time now to wait for Christmas. She got into her chair all cozy and she began to rock back and forth and nod her head and rock and nod and rock. And you can probably guess, she fell fast asleep. Well, poor Tanta, she was so exhausted from all of the baking and cleaning and decorating and visiting, she fell sound asleep. And if there was any Christmas magic that night, she didn't hear it or see it. Nor did she hear a bunch of little voices at her door calling out in creaky little voices, let us in, let us in. But someone heard. Christkindle happened to be passing by on his rounds and he looked over and he saw hundreds and hundreds of spiders on Tanta's doorstep. The spiders were calling to be let in so that they could see her tree. They had never been able to join in the festivities. Well, Christkindle felt sorry for the spiders and he thought, surely it couldn't hurt if they just had a peek. And so he went over and he lifted the latch and he opened the door a tiny bit. And then he had to hurry on his way. Well, in went the spiders, right past Tanta sleeping in her chair to the tree. They scurried and hurried and scuttled up at the tree and into the branches. And they were so excited to inspect every inch of that tree. They crisscrossed each other and they leapt from branch to branch. And as they climbed and climbed and climbed, there were many of them with their silken threads behind them. Now, when they got to the top and they'd inspected everything and their curiosity was satisfied, down came the spiders to the floor and out the door. Well, sometime later, Christkindle passed by again on his rounds, And he looked over and he saw the open door and he thought, oh, better shut that. So over he went. But as he went to shut the door, he looked in and there he could see Tanta's tree coated in spider webs. Oh, he knew she would not be happy about that. He knew how she felt about spiders. But it wasn't the spiders' fault. They were just doing what spiders do. And then Christkindl had an idea. He went over to the tree and with his finger, he began to touch every one of the webs on that tree. And as he did, they turned from their silken thread into strands of silver and gold. And the firelight caught them and they gleamed and glittered. It was magnificent. Well, the next morning when the rooster crowed and Tanta opened her eyes, you can imagine her shock and amazement and pure joy at the sight of her tree. It's Christmas magic, she cried. And she got her stool and ran over to the tree and hopped up on it and began to look at all of those beautiful strands of tinsel. And when she got up near the top, her gaze caught a tiny little spider who was just finishing his little web. It took him a while to get up there. He was very slow, and Christkindl had missed him. Well, when Tanta looked at the spider and his web, and then looked at all the tinsel, she put the two together and she realized that this tree was a gift, some Christmas magic from Christkindl. And she knew that this magic would only ever happen once. And so from that time on, every year when Tanta decorated her Christmas tree, when she was with the sugar cookies and the apples, then she would stand back, nod and smile, and she would say, time now for Christmas magic. And then she'd reach for the tinsel she had made out of strands of metal. And she had silver and gold. She would place them on her tree, just like the tinsel that Christkindl had put on her tree all those years ago to give her her Christmas miracle, her first gift of Christmas magic. And so it is today. Many of us put tinsel on our trees. I have to say it's a discussion between my husband and myself as to how much tinsel is okay and how much is too much. But it's a tradition that people around the world do. And it's kind of neat to have a story about it now, and you can feel free to share. But if you're like me and you have a real tree, if you should ever one day find a real spider in your tree, be careful not to sweep it away, because in Eastern Europe, they say this is good magic, a real spider. It will bring you good luck. And so often they will make their own ornaments, spiders to put on their tree, and even school children learn to fold them out of paper and put them on their trees. So this is my Christmas spider, and I'll be putting it on my tree after our storytelling today.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And hopefully Hallmark is listening so that they can make sure that next year there's lots of spider ornaments available for everyone. Now I'd like to introduce to you our next storyteller, Debbie Waldman. Debbie is an author and a storyteller who moved from central New York to Edmonton in 1992. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you very much. When I was a kid, I really wanted a Christmas tree. This wouldn't have been a problem, except that my dad was a rabbi and my mother was also Jewish, which made me very Jewish. None of my Jewish friends had Christmas trees, which should have been a pretty clear sign that I wasn't likely to have one either. But as I said, I was a kid. My best friend was Catholic and she had a tree. Our neighbors across the street were also Catholic, and they invited us to their house one Christmas Eve where we sat by the winking lights of their massive fragrant spruce and drank hot chocolate with marshmallows, and I stared at the gifts piled under the lowest branches thinking, so pretty, so many. To be honest, it wasn't the presents that were so appealing. We had 8 nights of presents with Hanukkah, largely because Dad was the rabbi and lots of people in the congregation gave us gifts. So my sister and I were never hurting in the gift department. We usually had at least one to open every night. What was cool to me was the idea of a live tree in the house, one decorated with winking lights and colorful round balls so shiny that I could see my reflection in them. I especially liked the silvery tinsel and the candy canes. Candy hanging from a tree. Sure, we had latkes fried in oil on Hanukkah and chocolate coins wrapped in gold foil, but what did we Jews know from hanging sweets on a tree? Nothing. When it came to sweets, the Christian holidays definitely had us beat. Easter, chocolate bunnies, chocolate eggs. Comparable Jewish holiday, Passover. We eat matzah for a week, a food so binding that fruit compote featuring prunes is a major dietary staple for 8 days, but I digress. Back to the tree. When I was about 7 or 8, I found a Christmas tree discarded by the curb up the street from our house. I was so excited. I was young and naive enough to believe that it was finances and not faith that kept Mom and Dad from getting us a tree. And here was one abandoned on the road, free for the taking. It was beschert, a sign from God. I dragged it down the street, but before I could get it through the front door, Mom and Dad set me straight. Jews do not celebrate Christmas, they reminded me, and it would not look good to have a Christmas tree in a house that the temple owns. Did I mention that we lived in a house that the temple owned? Well, I just did. Mom and Dad would not let me into the house that the temple owned until I dragged the tree back up the street and left it where I'd found it, because it also did not look good to have a tree by the curb outside the house that the temple owned. Being young and resourceful, I found a workaround. On top of the bookcase in my bedroom in the house that the temple owned, I had a collection of plastic animals and trees that I curated as if they were a display at the Museum of Natural History. From my best friend, I obtained some tiny silver balls, which I hung from the plastic fir tree. For tinsel, I used dental floss. Mom and Dad never noticed. I could have a Christmas tree forever. It never occurred to me that a day might come when I would not want a Christmas tree, but I can remember the exact moment it happened. It was during Hanukkah. Mom and my sister and I were visiting some temple members. I'll call them the Tannenbaums. Prominently displayed in the Tannenbaums' living room was an artificial tabletop tree, a white, fuzzy, furry-looking fire hazard sporting shiny ball ornaments that were strikingly similar to the ones on the miniature molded plastic tree atop my bookcase in the house that the temple owned. Mrs. Tannenbaum noticed us staring, and she mistook our disapproval for admiration. "It's a Hanukkah bush," she said proudly. In the privacy of our car on the way home, Mom called it a travesty. "It's a Christmas tree," she scoffed, "and a Christmas tree doesn't belong in a Jewish house." Had I been aware that even Theodor Herzl, the father of modern political Zionism, had a Christmas tree, I would have defended the Tannenbaums and myself by explaining to Mom that many wealthy German Jews who had been in the United States for generations had adopted the tradition, as had more recent landsmen desperate to assimilate. But I was decades away from that knowledge, and the disdain in Mom's voice shamed me so profoundly that the first thing I did upon returning home was to strip my plastic fir tree of its decorations and vow to never again have a Christmas tree in my house. Even after I married a non-Jewish guy, a guy who loved celebrating Christmas with his family, I maintained my no tree policy. As with any marriage, interfaith or otherwise, my husband and I made compromises. I agreed to raise our children here in Edmonton, his hometown, thousands of miles and a border away from the tight-knit Jewish community where I grew up in New York State. He agreed that we didn't have to have a Christmas tree as long as we lived in Edmonton and could celebrate the holiday with his parents in the house where he'd grown up. It never occurred to me that when we had children, they would consider Christmas their holiday. At home, we observed the Jewish holidays. On Shabbat, we lit candles and blessed the wine and homemade challah. I brought Elizabeth and Noah to Shabbat services in Hebrew school. They celebrated their coming-of-age ceremonies at our synagogue. She had a bat mitzvah, he had a bar mitzvah. The only time they went to church was when my mother-in-law signed them up for a week-long day camp one summer when they were in elementary school. Dave, my husband, isn't religious, but he loves celebrating Christmas. He wanted to share his favorite parts of the holiday with his children. When Elizabeth and Noah were young, he helped them to write letters to Santa every year. Letters that conveniently omitted any mention of a tree. They would leave their letter on a tray by the fireplace with cookies and milk. After they'd fallen asleep, Dave would disguise his handwriting and leave a letter next to the empty plate and glass, where Elizabeth and Noah would discover it on Christmas morning before we went to their grandparents' house for brunch and the gifts that Santa had left them. I can't recall the first time that Elizabeth, my oldest, asked for a tree, only that she was young enough not to protest at my response. "We're Jewish. Grandma and Granddad have a tree. You can help them decorate it at their house. They really appreciate your help." As she got older and more opinionated, my answer was less acceptable. She no longer believed in Santa, but that was beside the point. It's my house too, she would point out, but Dave and I stood our ground. As long as we could celebrate Christmas at his parents' house, we wouldn't have a tree. Every once in a while, though, he would subtly lobby me. It's a pagan symbol. It's not religious. It's called a Christmas tree, I would remind him, and that would end the discussion. In the early days of our marriage, I couldn't or didn't want to see far enough into the future when we wouldn't have a Christmas at his parents' house. COVID-19 changed that. When Alberta went into lockdown on December 8th of last year, indoor gatherings were prohibited. The kids couldn't go to their grandparents' house to decorate a tree, much less open presents over brunch on Christmas morning. For the first time in our marriage, we would be on our own for the holiday. Instead of trying to imagine a Christmas tree in my living room, I tried to imagine what it would be like if I couldn't observe my holidays in my house. No Shabbat candles and wine and challah on Friday nights. No friends for apples and honey and big dinners before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the holiest of the Jewish holidays. No decorations or candles or gifts or even latkes on Hanukkah. No Seder on Passover. It wouldn't feel like my home. When Elizabeth insisted, shortly after the lockdown announcement, that we had to have a Christmas tree, I didn't say no. Take it up with Dad, I said. If you guys want a tree, go ahead, but I don't want anything to do with it. I told myself my hostility was directly related to my fear of being left with the care and feeding of the tree. Not so far-fetched, given that Dave is so wrapped up in his work that household duties inevitably fall on me. But he surprised me. Not only did he and Elizabeth procure a tree, they put it up and decorated it. He took it down before the middle of January. Having a tree in the living room was disconcerting. Dave and Elizabeth staged it in front of the picture window. I thought of hanging a sign. This is not a Jewish house, in case anyone got confused when they saw the tree coexisting with the mezuzah on the front door and the menorah decal in the window. It's not my idea, I wanted to explain to the Amazon delivery people, the mail carrier, the dog walkers passing by our house. But in the end, I realized the only person troubled by the tree was me. I am being more gracious this year. When Elizabeth showed up on Saturday night, lugging a massive box with her grandparents' ornaments, I didn't make a snarky comment about how the box looked like a coffin. Instead, I took pictures while she and her father put up the tree. While her grandfather watched the Grey Cup game in the living room, her grandmother, who has dementia and moved to a care home just a few months ago, watched and provided commentary about how beautiful it was. I still don't believe a Christmas tree is a pagan symbol, nor do I think one belongs in a Jewish house. But after 29 years of marriage, I'm ready to admit that ours isn't a Jewish house. It's a house in which one of the inhabitants is Jewish and one isn't. And those people love and respect each other. And when you love and respect someone, it feels really good when they embrace what you embrace. For 29 years, Dave has embraced my holidays. Now it's time for me to embrace his at home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for your wonderful story with a very important message, I think, about diversity and accepting diversity at this time of year in particular. Okay, moving on. Our next storyteller is Bethany Ellis. Bethany is also a member of Storytelling Alberta Edmonton chapter. She has told stories all around the world in various venues wherever children and adults gather to listen. So welcome, Bethany.
Thank you. Christmas, 1969. Uncles, aunts, cousins all descend upon our tiny house in Peace River, Alberta. The adults are all going to sleep upstairs next to the bathroom, but now they are making merry in the living room, playing with beer and cigarettes as we children understand it. We kids are directly below them, camped out on mattresses and rugs and sleeping bags on the cold basement floor. It's kind of like a budget camping holiday, and we think it is great. Now that year, our ages were 9, 5, 5, 4, and 3. So I was by far the oldest, which gave me some power. I could decide which games we would play and how those games would go. I could boss them all around, but I had zero power to make my youngest cousin Laurie stop crying and wailing. You see, he wanted to be upstairs with the adults, but his parents were upstairs hiding from him. So the rest of us went up the wooden stairs, knocked on the door of the basement, and tattled. We're trying to sleep. We weren't. And Laurie's making so much noise. My mother came down. Laurie, what's all this about? Look at your big cousin Sean. He's not crying. He's a big boy. Do you have a smile in there for your Auntie Val? No. Then my dad came thumping down the stairs, and we thought, oh, he's in for it now, because my dad could put the fear of God into God. He began yelling at my cousin, who just cried louder. I think he realized that while your parents have the right to, thump you, your uncle does not. So my father resorted to threats. Little boys who cry on Christmas Eve don't get Tonka trucks from Santa Claus, which I thought was oddly specific. Well, when that didn't work, my dad went up the stairs and said, yeah, well, I don't want any of you coming through this door until tomorrow morning. And I realized, quite frankly, that adults were useless. But he had given me an idea. And so I said, Laurie, shh, Laurie, shh. Listen, Laurie, can you hear, Can you hear Santa walking around upstairs? Is he bringing you trucks? Well, that worked. He went right quiet, and we all listened. Yeah, now we could hear the footsteps of the adults upstairs playing with their beer and cigarettes. But then we heard a totally new sound. It was a noise that had never been heard in our house before. It went, and then louder, followed by all the men in the house clapping and cheering and saying, oh, almost, try again. Hey, whose turn is it now? We were mightily curious. We needed a spy. Sean, I said to my little brother, go upstairs, knock on the door, and tell them you have to pee. But I don't have to pee. Just tell them you do. So up the stairs he went, knock, knock, knock. I gotta pee. And they said, you don't need the bathroom for that. Go down the drain by the washing machine. So he went down the stairs, and he dutifully peed down the drain. I thought you didn't have to pee. Now I do. Jeannie, I said to my cousin, you're a girl. You're a guest. That won't make you go down the hole. Up the stairs she went, knock, knock, knock. I have to pee too, and I am a girl. No mercy. Pee down the drain. Oh, we were being driven insane by curiosity. We could not imagine what that sound could be, but we were pretty sure it must be a present for one of us. And then I remember that I am the oldest, and that gives me power, and I can use this power for good or for evil. And evil is way more interesting. And so I announce, I know what it is. Somebody is getting a pet Bengal tiger for Christmas. And we listen. And by golly, that sounds exactly like a Bengal tiger. And when all the men are cheering, I say, oh, they're just teaching it tricks. Bengal tigers, they're the smartest kind. Suddenly, I'm an expert on Bengal tigers. Well, the more we listen, the more it is absolutely clear that there is a large jungle cat jumping on the furniture and growling at the adults. And we need to know how big this tiger is. Our lives depend upon it. Shannon, I say to my 4-year-old sister, go upstairs, knock on the door, tell them you have to do a number 2. They won't make you do that down the drain. And when you get to the bathroom, don't just go in and come out. Go in and count to 25 and then flush and then come down the stairs. And she says, oh, but I can't count to 25. Oh, well, count to 15 twice. I can't count to 15. Well, how high can you count? 10, sometimes 11. Oh, okay, count to 10, sometimes 11, 4 times. My math skills have never been very good. So up the stairs she went, knocked on the door, and when they understood what she needed, that tiger went silent. We could hear her little footsteps padding across the kitchen and the living room and going up the stairs, and then some very loud counting, and then the flush of the toilet, and down the stairs she came. And when the door was flung open, my sister was standing in front of my mother, who looked down at us very surprised to see the 4 of us standing on the top stairs looking like this. And she said, "Why was she counting?" "Oh, I don't know. Kids," I said. So we grabbed my little sister and hustled her down to the mattresses, and we interrogated her. "What did you see? Did you see under the tree? Did you see in the stockings? Did you see a tiger?" And she said, "No, Mommy put her hands on my eyes and walked me up and then down the stairs. I didn't see anything. I didn't see a tiger. And I don't want to see a tiger, and I don't want a tiger for Christmas, and I'm scared of tigers." And she bursts into tears. And I read the room, and I realize that the other 3 are soon going to follow suit. They'll cry so loud, the adults will hear, they'll come down, I'll be blamed, and there go all my Christmas presents. So I said, "No, no, 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 no. Of course there's no tiger up there. Look, where would our parents get a tiger?" "Maybe from the zoo." No, there's no zoo here. The closest zoo is 300 miles down south in Edmonton. "Well, maybe from a circus then." "No, there is no circus in town. Look, 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 look. It's not a tiger. It's a..." Inspiration hits. "It's a rock polisher." "A what?" "A rock polisher," I repeat, and I look to my brother and sister for confirmation. "Remember, huh? Remember when we went to visit Mom's boss's house and he had that little machine in the basement that went, it polishes the rocks so he can put it on those jewelry things and give it to all the girls at the office for Christmas presents? That is a rock polisher." And the more we listen, "Oh, yeah, that's a rock polisher." And so somehow we all drift to sleep, and each one of us is thinking, "I really hope I don't get the rock polisher for Christmas." Morning comes, and Christmas is here. And Santa, he did bring me a present. I guess he's forgotten about the story about tigers. That year, I got a wonderful dollhouse, which I promptly turned into a workhouse for orphans, because my favorite movie that year was Oliver. And I thought suffering children was way more interesting than a family with lots of furniture to move around. My brother got a cool present that year too. It was a Hot Wheels race car track. There were these lurid orange plastic tracks arranged in an oval, and you would put the Hot Wheels track through the Hot Wheels supercharger power station, and it would go, and that would shoot them up the other end, and it would go up and around a loop. Actually, it never quite went all the way around the loop. It would fall, but my brother thought that was great too. Later, much later, it occurred to me that the of the Hot Wheels supercharger power station sounded a lot like a rock polisher, or maybe a large predatory jungle animal. But no, that couldn't be the case, because that would mean that all the daddies and uncles upstairs had been playing cars all Christmas Eve. And we were pretty sure daddies only played with beer and cigarettes. But that is my story of the year, that none of our Christmas presents included a Bengal tiger, nor, thank goodness, a rock polisher. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. And maybe a warning for all the adults out there that put the kids in the basement and are packing up and trying out the Christmas toys before Christmas morning. Okay, moving on to our next storyteller. I'm pleased to introduce Cheryl Chagnon Gray Eyes. Cheryl is a member of the Storytelling Alberta Calgary chapter. As a Cree Métis woman, she generously shares her learnings and her teachings as she travels the red road of Indigenous spirituality. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hello all, Merry Christmas, Tanse Oki. My story today is gifting, giving and receiving. I want to share some insight with you. The name on my driver's license is Cheryl Shanyo Grey Eyes, and I was gifted with a beautiful name in the Cree Sweat Lodge ceremony. My Cree name is Nanantawe Esquayo Yahukapimotate, which translates to healing woman who walks far. A beautiful, gifted name received in ceremony and love, and welcomed with tears of gratitude and appreciation. I love getting presents. I love giving presents. Who doesn't love getting gifts and giving them? I want to share with you some concepts regarding gift giving, giving and receiving, which may deepen the way you look at this whole process. Some of this information will settle in your heart as familiar and kind. Other info may go right over your head. And if you are truly blessed, some of this info will come back to you when you need it most. In Indigenous ways of knowing, giving and receiving are daily rituals. As a Nihaya Esquayo, a Cree woman, I can only share what I have learned, what I know, what I believe, and I give my words and share my teachings with good intent. I humbly ask for your kindness, patience, and understanding, and I thank you for your presence and for giving me your time and kind attention to what I have to share in a good way. I wake up and smile and give thanks to my Creator. Thank you, Creator, for the gift of life. Thank you for blessings received. Thank you for the fact that I woke up on the top side of the lawn. That's a good thing. Then I crawl out of bed and get on with my day. As I sink into my pillow at night, thank you, Creator, for blessings received. I am so grateful. Grateful for the roof over my head. Grateful for my warm, clean bed. Grateful for my full tummy. Grateful for my beautiful family members, wherever they may be. I am filled with gratitude as I settle down to sleep. I used to wake up and worry, concerned about the day ahead, often dreading what the day had in store, or go to bed and dwell on the problems in my life. But that is an awful waste of energy and attitude. Been there, done that, and there is a better way that I'd like to share with you. On this red road of Indigenous spirituality, as we call it, I have learned how to be grateful for Creator's blessings and Mother Earth's abundance. Living in gratitude and appreciation, that is living in joy, appreciating the moment, relishing the now, really being present and open to receive. Let me share a little bit of insight and some information on Indigenous protocol and focus. For example, when I pick sage, one of the sacred medicines of the medicine wheel, the women's medicine, my go-to for smudging and prayer, I have learned to pick it in a good way from a beautiful Cree Métis elder in ceremony. This is a woman's ceremony, and we honor Mother Earth by wearing long skirts and sharing proper protocol and ceremony, songs and prayers before we harvest. When we pick sage in ceremony, we offer tobacco to ask for permission from Creator for this gift. We then sprinkle the tobacco on the ground near the plant to thank Mother Earth for her beautiful gift. We would hold up a pinch of tobacco, and I say, thank you, Creator, for blessings received, for asking permission for Creator, and to acknowledge that Creator has heard my prayer. I then sprinkle that pinch of tobacco on the ground with the words, thank you, Mother Earth, for the gift of your bounty, to show my gratitude and humility to Mother Earth for this sacred gift of medicine. Tobacco is not only a sacred medicine itself, it also happens to be a great fertilizer and actually enriches the soil, adding to the sustainability of the plant species as well as others in the vicinity. When we pick sage, we snap off the plant at the roots, leaving the mother plant under the ground to continue to sprout new plants. We never take more than 1/3 of the medicines in the patch, always leaving plenty for others to harvest and for future generations of sage plants to keep on growing. Yep, Indigenous people knew all about sustainability before it was a big thing like today. By the way, buffalo sage can now be found on all sections of Nose Hill Park. We've been planting and picking in ceremony there for over 20 years. Children understand fairness and appreciation, and that you don't get something for nothing. I had volunteered to share Indigenous teachings at a Jane's Walk in May 2015 with about 20 people up on Nose Hill. I shared the teachings around tobacco and that we do not take anything from Mother Earth, herbs and medicine, rocks and flowers, water, and so on, without asking Creator for permission and giving thanks to Mother Earth, usually with a tobacco offering, but other offerings can be used in a pinch. A mom with her 2 kids had taken in this outdoor talk, and the mom befriended me later on Facebook. She shared a story about how my words had influenced her kids' behavior. They had gone for a visit to Elbow Falls, and the little guy had run ahead, and he grabbed this rock. I like this rock, and he picks it up and he sticks it in his pocket. His older sister admonished him. Did you make an offering for that rock? Realizing his sister was quite right, he quickly looked around him, looking for something to offer. Then impulsively he tore off his shoe and threw his shoe into Elbow Falls before his mom could stop him. Lesson learned. Mama now carries tobacco in her purse and in her car just in case, and now the kids know it too. I have learned that giving and gifting is sometimes a one-way giving, and that is okay. Unconditional gifting is when we give something to someone and they can do with it as they please. Once an item is gifted, even if it means a lot to us as the giver, it is no longer ours once given, and our attachment to that item has ended with the giving. What does that mean? For example, I gifted a beautiful ribbon skirt to my mother last Christmas, but she didn't care for it. So she gave it back to me in a bag of clothing she no longer wanted for me to pass along to others. The ribbon skirt meant a lot to me. I had bid on it on a silent auction. I had won the bid, I paid for it, and I was able to give it to my mom. However, it was no longer my property once I gave it to her. At first, I felt crushed and hurt, but then I realized that undeniable truth. That gift was no longer mine, and my joy came from choosing it and giving it. I had to let my emotional attachment and my expectations go, for it was no longer my gift. This is a very hard learning, but it was also freeing for both me and my mom. By the way, I ended up regifting this ribbon skirt to my youngest sister, who really wanted and needed a ribbon skirt, who has loved it and has worn it proudly since. I also used to have a real issue in receiving gifts, often not feeling worthy of the honor, recognition, and appreciation. I've since learned a simple and gracious thank you so very much is all I need to show my appreciation of the gift and to honor the giver or the givers in a good way. Gifting my givers with a big smile and a hug is all that is really needed. Creator gives us gifts every day. And if we focus on gratitude, appreciation, acknowledgement, we can choose to live in joy and appreciation in a good way. I thank you for your kind attention to these sharings. And may the Creator bless you and those you love with good health, safe travels, abundant joy and laughter, and enough each and every day. Thank you, Creator, for blessings received. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Cheryl. Some important learnings that I think we all can take and reflect on at this time of year when gift giving is very popular, but is also changing because I think of COVID. So we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And just a couple of notes in case you were curious as to why an organization with the name Age Friendly Edmonton is doing storytelling. Research actually shows that we get better at storytelling as we age, and that when we tell stories, it actually triggers parts of our brain the same as if we were a musician playing an instrument or an athlete running a race. So storytelling has some really good health benefits. So what we'd like to recommend is that after this session today, you think on your own stories, and maybe in your get together with friends and family, as you gather over the season or for winter events, you think of the stories that you could tell. Thank you again for coming. If you would be interested in any more information on Storytelling Alberta, we have monthly events and workshops that are run on a regular basis. And just to note that Storytelling Alberta is actually receives funding from the Edmonton Art Council, the Canada Council of the Arts, and the Alberta Foundation of the Arts. The website is there for you, and you can find all the events and more information on the website.